This is a typical high school classroom. These two juniors are preparing to begin their day. Class, good morning. How are you guys today?
Good.
Okay, well, today I'll be discussing the topic of child maltreatment with you guys. My name is Ms. Alonso, and as most of you guys know, I'm the counselor here on campus. Well, first of all, does anyone know what child abuse is? Yes?
Is it when kids get beat up by their parents?
You're right on track, but it's a little bit more than that. The Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act defines child abuse and neglect as any recent act or failure to act on the part of a parent or caretaker which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse or exploitation, or an act or failure to act which presents an imminent risk or serious harm. Another definition was presented by Asar and Wolf for a study they conducted in 1998. It was defined as in terms of the degree in which parent uses aversive or inappropriate control strategies with his or her child and fails to provide minimal standards of caregiving and nurturance. Now let's discuss the magnitude of the problem. Who here can tell me who is affected by child abuse and maltreatment?
I think that the people affected most by it is poor people or people who live in bad neighborhoods.
Interesting. What makes you think that?
It's just I've seen it a lot on TV.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. There's a lot of common misconceptions about this issue. Here are a few myths and facts about the issue at hand. Myth: it's only abuse if it's violent. Fact: physical abuse is just one type of child abuse. There are also emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect, which can be just as damaging. Myth: only bad people abuse their children. It's easy to say that only bad people abuse their children, but they can also have been victims themselves, be struggling with mental health issues, or have substance abuse problems. Myth: child abuse doesn't happen in good families. Fact: child abuse doesn't only happen in poor families and neighborhoods. It crosses all racial, economic, and cultural lines. Myth: most child abusers are strangers. Fact: while abuse by strangers does happen, most abuse is often done by family members. Myth: abused children always grow up to be abusers. Fact: it's true that abused children are likely to repeat the cycle, but there are some parents that break the cycle and become great parents. Well, child abuse and neglect can potentially affect anyone. When it comes to child abuse in America, children are suffering from a hidden epidemic of child abuse and neglect. Every year, more than 3 million reports of child maltreatment are made to state and local agencies in the United States involving more than 6 million children. This is because reports can involve more than one child at a time. The United States has one of the worst records among industrialized nations, losing an average between 4 and 7 children every day to child abuse and neglect. Here are some general statistics about the topic. Every hour, 77 cases of child abuse are made. Each year, there are 679,000 child abuse victims of abuse and neglect. More than 4 children die every day as a result of child abuse. 3/4 of child fatalities are children younger than 3 years of age. More than 90% of juvenile sexual abuse victims know their perpetrator. 80% of victims were neglected, 18 were physically abused, 9 were sexually abused, and 8.7 were psychologically maltreated. Now take a look at your handouts. The graph entitled Estimated Child Fatalities Per Day Attributed to Child Maltreatment shows that there has been a trend of child abuse rising throughout the past few years, and it is slowly declining. This presentation will focus on the 4 most common types of child maltreatment, which are physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. Sexual abuse includes intercourse, touching of a child, or sexual exploitation. Emotional abuse can be humiliating a child, calling them worthless, or other names. Neglect is failing to provide for a child's basic needs such as food, shelter, hygiene, and medical care when they're sick. Children who are abused by their parents have been shown by research to be at risk for a full range of emotional and behavioral disorders, including internalizing and externalizing problems such as conduct disorder and depression. Physically abused children are more likely to have higher levels of behavioral problems than non-maltreated children. For example, sexual abuse predicted low self-esteem, and emotional abuse predicted difficulties in peer relationships. Again, guys, take a look at your handouts, the one with the graphic organizer. Here are the 4 types of child maltreatment, and as you can see, physical abuse can lead to possible death or injury or behavioral problems. Sexual abuse can lead to psychological disorders or low self-esteem. Emotional abuse can lead to deficiencies in social development or a lack of empathy. And neglect can lead to deficiencies in brain development or the failure to form a secure bond. Talk about development. Can anyone tell me what development is? Yes?
Is it the way something grows?
Yes, exactly. Merriam-Webster synonyms include evolution, growth, maturation, expansion, and progress. In terms of development, child maltreatment can have a big effect on the child. Evidence shows that abuse leads to changes in brain structure. The brain develops by making neural connections. These connections happen at a very rapid rate in the early years. The brain only grows depending on the amount of stimulation it receives. If it does not receive any stimulation, then connections are not made. It's important to note that abuse and its effects depend on factors like age, whether it was a one-time incident, whether it was chronic, or on other environmental characteristics. Memory showed that children who are maltreated had more memory impairments than non-maltreated children. Yet another study showed that neglect can be more detrimental than the abuse itself. Finally, it was found that the chance to develop a psychiatric disorder was higher if the maltreatment was more severe. Are there any questions so far? Are you guys with me? Okay, good. Let's continue. Remember to feel free to ask any questions. Okay, so since this is a delicate issue, it must be handled delicately as well. Deciding what to do when you suspect a child is abused or neglected can be difficult and confusing. Depending on where you live, you might report suspected abuse or neglect to your local Child Protective Services, or CPS. Most states have child abuse hotlines set up to take calls related to child abuse and neglect. If you think that a child is in immediate danger, you should call your local police or 911 right away. Yes?
Yes, I have a question about CPS. How do they handle concerns about a child?
Great question. CPS is the major system of intervention of child abuse and neglect in California. Their goal is to keep a child safe in his house. When a referral is received, they decide whether to accept the case, and then they intervene in the crisis if required. CPS then applies family preservation and support services for the families, assesses and identifies problems, plans and provides services, sets goals, identifies resources and timeframes. They then document the case and then terminate the case or transfer it to another program. In order to stop child maltreatment in its tracks, school counselors, teachers, staff, and other students should be aware of red flags. Upon suspecting anything, the counselor should bring in the student and talk to them to verify and to see how serious the situation might or might not be. Remember, even if the student refuses to cooperate, a counselor must always report it. So finally, it's important to remember that child abuse and neglect can happen to anyone, anywhere. A child who is maltreated may suffer developmentally, socially, and academically. When you hear about a child being maltreated, you should contact CPS immediately. You might just end up saving that child's life. Thank you so much for listening, guys. This concludes our presentation.